Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat special edition Parashat class, Parashat Lech Lecha. Abraham Avinu is on the scene, and we asked this morning, what about the number one covenant? Covenant in Hebrew has a special word that is dedicated to it in Torah language, and that is berit. Berit, you can say, is an agreement, it's a pact, it's a covenant, it's a commitment. And we see throughout the Torah all types of forms of beritot, of covenants. We see them relating to different entities. We see them associated with different mitzvot. We can categorize beritot, covenants, pacts in different categories. And really, it is a almost dominant-like theme in the Torah Kadoshah. We have, of course, a berit between Hashem and the world. In last week's parasha, regarding the mabul, or the non-return of such a retribution, a punishment to mankind. We have, of course, a number of beritot, the pacts between Hashem and Am Yisrael. Starting in this week's parasha with Berit Ben HaBetarim, we have, of course, throughout the saga of the desert and Am Yisrael's connection to Hashem, bookend on one end, the Brit Be'Horev by Har Sinai, and on the other end, the Brit Ba'albot Moab on the banks of the Jordan River, on the cusp of entering Eretz Yisrael. We have beritot with individuals. We saw Hashem made a berit, special personal berit with Pinehas. And of course, between men themselves, we see all types of beritot. Abraham with Abimelech, Ishaq with Abimelech, Yaakov with Laban, right? So berit is a major theme from a number of different perspectives in the Torah. There are entities, as we say it. Last week's parasha, the Keshet, the rainbow, as we call it, itself, the entity is a berit. Later in the Midbar, when we fashioned the luchot and we put them in an Aron Kodesh, the Aron's called Aron HaBerit, the luchot, tablets are called Luchot HaBerit. And as we said, there are a number of mitzvot that are associated and really labeled as beritot in the Torah. As we'll discuss in a moment, the Berit Milah, the actual name of the circumcision, built into it says Berit Milah. Shabbat, Oti B'nai Ben B'nai Israel is a Berit. Interestingly, the idea of putting salt, Melach Berit Elohecha, on korbanot. It's called a berit. In the Torah, you have certain offerings and gifts to Kohanim, like terumah, labeled as berit. And actually, it's interesting. I believe that you can really offer a general categorization of beritot just based on those mitzvot that are called berit. You have a mitzvah that's a physical covenant, like the berit milah. You have those that are time-bound covenants. You have beritot that have to do with something on your calendar, periodic, Shabbat, for instance, of course. They say the Rosh Chodesh is also a berit. And you have beritot, you can say that the melach, that salt on the korban, the cherry on the icing on the cake, as they say, represents korbanot in general, as does the terumah, is a possible affiliation with an offering and a sacrifice. And those are beritot of service. Isn't it fascinating that actually those are what the nations of the world throughout the different centuries of oppressive regimes who have limited us and who have oppressed us and who have been so racially biased against us in different societies, what do they attack? They always went straight to the berit. They limited and prohibited Berit Milah, we see Shabbat, and of course, the absolute obsession for centuries, both pre-first temple destruction and pre-second temple destruction of our enemies, were with the berit of service to God, as we said, the Melach, Korbanot, Bet HaMikdash, until they finally were successful in destroying them. So they're always out for the berit, because obviously those indicate and represent some real pact and commitment between Borei Olam and Am Yisrael. But then there is what we encounter in this parasha, the first berit. Isn't it curious that the first covenant between Hashem and Am Yisrael is one that is so, you can say, not just rudimentary, not just physical, but one that is even hard to discuss because it's physical and a part of one's body that's private. It's not something that is what you would call metaphysical, spiritual, what you would call, what you would feel is more divine and holy. Right? Talking about the first covenant between first Hashem and the chosen Jew, Abraham Avinu, and then extended, of course, in Parashat Tazria, officially, it's repeated as a berit, b'yom hashemini yemor basar olato, as a covenant between us and God. You would think that it would be something that is in the higher, more divine spiritual realms. There's such an important connection between man and God, and yet it's a circumcision, a foreskin of man. So curious. And maybe because of that, it's become in recent times unthinkably challenged. It started in Europe, some movements like that in Germany. It spilled over the ocean to America, which, by the way, is besides Israel, is the country with the highest percentage of circumcised men. It was 80%, now it's dropping down, 70% maybe. But there's been this really, obviously, warped sense of ethics. But as we move on in this century, of all types of opposition and challenges to circumcision, you actually have movements against it. You have Jewish movements against circumcision. You have things, by the way, you've had protests against governments. There's been different types of votes and referendums. The most have been struck down. But you have a movement of doctors against circumcisions. They actually got Medicaid not to cover circumcision in 16 states. That's a current fact. You have movements like those called the intact movement. You have Jews beyond the bris, right? You have people that are surgically putting this foreskin back on. Sounds unthinkable, right? So they're still challenging it in their own way. And yet maybe we open the door for them to challenge it by making this first covenant between man and God a physical one, a sensitive one, a painful one. And of course, the outside nations could look at it as an inhumane one, even an unethical one, ironically. So why this? Why did God start with this? Let's dig in just a little bit to the concepts, the meaning, the reasons behind this covenant, Berit Milah. And think about the fact that God created man with the foreskin and then reserved it, so to speak, to be a covenant with his chosen nation to remove that foreskin. So you have really some powerful themes behind Berit Milah, like Sfordanov, for instance, who says very simply that this is a stamp, it's a physical stamp on an Eved, on a servant, by his master. This is my servant. Let me label him physically. You have the Sefer HaChanuch that says this makes us distinct from the nations of the world physically as we are, you can say, spiritually. You have the Rabbi Bachya that says it actually is on a Jew a sign of his faith in the oneness of God. And the Emek Davad sort of, you can say, moderates or elaborates upon that by saying that really it's an indicator wherever we are that we carry along this identity of our creation, that we are created for the purpose of recognizing God. We carry that along with us at all times. The idea of identifying with our master and with always testifying almost to his oneness and to his being. That explains why something on your body that doesn't quite explain the location on the body for this Berit Milah, which once again left the door open for criticism to the cynical on this earth. And therefore we dig in even deeper. And the Sefer HaChanuch goes even deeper. And he explains that this is the reproductive organ. And when you stamp the reproductive organ of the human race, you make a major statement. When God stamps it, you make a major statement. And that is that what is the significance of perpetuating mankind and reproducing more human beings, if not only to be subjugated to God. And so I will stamp and sign my covenant on the reproductive organ to say that the only objective of reproduction, of procreation, of perpetuation of mankind is subservience to God. That's it. You have the Ramban who takes it even further and says, look, this is the organ that fuels man's maybe most powerful desire. How much potential sin, how many averot, how much destruction of family and society can come when this desire is played upon. And so therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in identifying himself on man, stamps this area so that if man commits to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and subjects himself, he's really showing a discipline and a self-control over the most sensitive drive of man. And therefore we subject ourselves in not just physically, in all our drives, in all our intents, in all our actions, even in the most difficult desire to conquer, we're there for God. And it turns out that a berit that on one hand you could have said is maybe ugly, maybe dirty, maybe inappropriate, private, who could talk about it, who could think about it, is actually the most appropriate first handshake, first stamp of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on his chosen nation, where he not only distinguishes them with the rest of the world with a physical stamp and reminds us all the time that we represent him, but he does so in a manner that reminds us and speaks to the rest of the world as to what is the purpose of mankind and how we, the chosen nation, subject ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with our sign on our body that represents the continuation of mankind only under one condition, only with the subservience to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Kli Akar takes it to another beautiful level to explain that it's the physical orla foreskin and that type of commitment that eventually leads to the intellectual and mental one. As Moshe Rabbeinu advised us in the book of Devarim, umaltem et orlat levavchem, to circumcise the foreskin of our hearts and to uncover that yesod hara and to open ourselves up to God and to uncover and conquer rationalization and justification of our action and be completely intellectual honest with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. All that is the extension of the physical orla and the Brit Milah and the first covenant that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made with his holy nation. The next time we hear a baby cry at a Brit Milah, we should be inspired by the fact that one more customer, one more member has been signed up to the great nation of God and has expressed to the rest of the world, this is my God, I represent him, and I subject myself to him to the eyes of the world. Our first covenant to Brit Milah, Amen v'amen, Shabbat Shalom.